today to our Learning to Fail virtual boardroom that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Jane Hodgson. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Jane, who will introduce herself shortly. In this event, you will be challenged to think differently about failure and to see it not as something to avoid, but as something to harness. If you've got any burning questions or comments during the session, please put them into the chat box facility and we'll cover them as we go along. I'm now going to hand you over to Jane, who will introduce herself and start the event. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you. As Jo said, my name's Jane Hodgson, and I'm going to take through this session today on failing. And I think what I want to do is, first of all, just find out a little bit about yourselves so I know who I'm dealing with. So in the chat box, can you just put where, who are you, where are you dialing in from? I'm just curious. I'm more nosy than anything. It's not really adding any value other than me being nosy, but I'm curious to see who we've got on the call today. So where are you dialing in from today? Manchester, love it. Tunbridge Wells, Lincoln, fabulous. Bradford, London, Cheshire, Midlands, Kings Lynn, Newcastle. Whoa, okay, yeah, fabulous. Aylesbury, Gravesend, Warwick, Cardiff, yeah. Southampton, you're just down the road from me, Caroline. Fabulous. Cambridge, Reading. Great stuff. So we've got a real spread of people today, which is fantastic. So I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I've been a trainer for 22 years now. I started my own business in 2018. That business failed in 2022. We all know why. But then I started it up again. Oh, sorry, my slides are progressing. I started it up again in 2023. And it's been a tough, and there's been failures on the way, but that's fine. But I just basically want to let you know you're in safe hands. I've been doing this for a long time. I want you to think about something now. When was a time that you learned a new skill? So can you put in the chat box, when did you learn a new skill? Think about when we did the pandemic, for example. Everyone was learning banana bread and, restoring cars and doing all sorts of stuff. So what new skills do we have? Have you learned a new skill? It doesn't have to be a pandemic, by the way. It could be any time. But any time you've learned a new skill. Has anybody ever learned a new skill? Within the last 6 months, I've learned to build a business. Fantastic. Well, I hope that's going well for you. Last holiday season, HR manager taught us mindfulness. Absolutely. Through needle felting. Excellent. Yoga. Brilliant. Lego serious play facilitation. That sounds interesting. AI prompts. Yeah, we're all having to learn those skills, aren't we? Learning to crochet. Defib training. Yeah, fabulous. Coaching. Mental health first aid. Pilates. Yeah. Learned a new job in the last 6 months. Self-care using AI. Yeah. Learned how to run 5K without dying. Well, you're here, Vicky. We will take that as a victory for sure. Excellent. So what I'm seeing there is you've all learned something. So I feel very, very safe in saying that you have all failed at some point. Okay. So we've just got somebody learning pottery. Asha, you've been learning pottery. Can you tell me, Asha, have you ever done that and the pot's gone and it's gone all wonky and wobbly? I suspect you probably have. Kizomba, I have no idea. Yeah, I know you have. I did pottery at school and I failed quite frequently, actually. What is Kizomba? Can somebody tell me what Kizomba is? Sounds exciting. Dancing, great stuff. Now, again, at some point, you've probably failed at that. You've probably gone, I'm not meant to step that way. I'm meant to do that way, or I was meant to do this or that with my arm. We've all failed in some way or other, and some bigger than others. So I guess my next challenge to you is think about a time when you've failed. So you don't have to put it in the chat. I'm not going to torture you with that. But just have a think, when have you failed? Okay. Not necessarily, it could be something as simple as, putting 2 sugars in the wrong tea or something. My love life has failed, has it? Oh, no. Okay. Well, that makes me sad, but it's not therapy, so I'm not going to start asking you lots of intrusive questions. Think about when you failed. You don't have to put it into the chat. Failing this morning, keeping cool while the kids are getting ready. I get that as well. Just hold on to that thought. We will fail your driving test. Listen, all the best drivers fail the first time. I'm going to come back to that, right? I'm going to come back to it. And I want you to have a look at these three people. First of all, do you know who they are? Again, use the chat if you want. And what do you think they have in common? Tell me what you think these people have in common. Anyone? They've all failed, yeah. Ambition, yeah, absolutely. Really love that. Ambition. So that's the other side of failure, is if we haven't got ambition, we'll never fail. Because if we don't try, we'll never fail. And then that's great, that's safe. But if we never fail, we'll never achieve anything. All successful, all famous. Yeah, they are now. But we know for a fact that they have all failed. So, Michael Jordan says he's missed more than 9,000 shots in his career. But we never remember that, do we? We always remember the big shots and the ones that win the games and the ones that win the championships. Yeah, 26 times he's been trusted to take the game-winning shot. If you were in a game and you had one shot to win the game and you had Michael Jordan on the team, you'd be like, got it, nailed on. But he's failed. Yeah, this one always tickles me, I suppose. Spielberg was rejected. He went to Southern California School of Art to do cinematic art, to study films, and they actually refused him. They said, we don't want him because he's not creative enough. This man's films have earned 147 Oscars. So not only is that a failure for him, I think that's a failure for the admission staff. Like, you turned down Spielberg, what are you thinking? And again, Oprah, you're absolutely right. Hugely successful individual, one of the most successful women in America. And she was fired from a primetime news anchor show because she was deemed not good enough. So, failure is just something that's out there. Now, if I was to ask you who's the best footballer in the world, put in a chat box, who do you think? It's usually a debate between two people. And what I would say is one of them's got a World Cup. Ronaldo. Yeah, Ronaldo and Messi. Ronaldo. I cannot have Ronaldo. One, because of that wink, because I don't forgive and forget very easily. But two, he didn't win my son. Oh, that's nice. But he didn't win anything he didn't win the World Cup. So for me, it is Messi. And we always think, yeah, Messi's an absolute genius. He is. He's the world's best footballer. But let's see if this will play. That's the best footballer in the world failing on a world stage. And what always tickles me about that is all the people like this with their phones ready and they're like, oh my God, it's Messi, he's going to score. Because we are absolutely convinced Messi is going to score. Well, he doesn't. So, we have all failed. It is part of life. Let me just get rid of that. So let's look at failure. This is a guy called Rene Redzepi. I don't know if you've got any foodies on the call, but there's a restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma, which was voted the best restaurant in the world 5 times running. Imagine that, the best restaurant in the world 5 times running. And he says everything we've achieved, we've done by failing. This is a lady called Amy Edmondson. Some of you might have heard of her. She was doing her PhD thesis many years ago, and her hypothesis was that better teams will lead to fewer medical errors. So she spent 3 years collecting data from hospitals all over the United States. And when it came to the time to start to analyze her data, she said, her world crumbled because the research didn't show that whatsoever. The research showed that better teams, so i.e. they worked better, more collaborative, they had better communication, etc., had more errors. They experienced more errors. So better teams experience more errors. Now, I'm going to ask you, what do you think about that? How do you think that's even possible? What do you think is going on? Better teams had more errors. Put something in the chat for me. Why do you think that might be? Is that right? Or is that people learn from mistakes? They learn from better teams. Right. Penny. Ding, 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 ding. Penny's got it. Better teams feel safe enough to admit them. So it wasn't actually that they had more errors. Not at all. In fact, that's far from the truth. What were the other teams doing? The teams that weren't as communicative, didn't have as much teamwork. What were they doing? What do you think they were doing? Hiding their errors. Absolutely. So the teams that weren't doing particularly well were, brushing it under the carpet. So her world fell apart. And if you read her book, she talks about, she's like, oh my goodness, this is a massive failure on my part. I've made this assumption. It's not true. What do I do? I'm going to fail my PhD. I've spent all this money, all this time. But actually it led her to some other discoveries. And that's the great thing about failure, I guess. And she talks about 3 types of failure. And the first type of failure is one that we all do on a pretty regular basis. This is what's called just basic failure. Simple, it's preventative, it's routine. It could be something serious, so issuing the wrong medication, for example. It could be putting petrol in a diesel car, putting sugar in somebody's tea when they didn't want it. It's a routine thing that has occurred, but it's in known territory. So it's basic. Right? Doesn't mean to say it's not necessarily catastrophic. Like I say, putting diesel in a petrol car could cost you a lot of money, but it's a very basic error. It's a simple error. There's not a lot of variables in there. The next type of error that we talk about is this complex failure. And this is something that occurs in a familiar but complicated system. And there's multiple and unexpected things going on. Many little things. So there is an example of an oil tanker. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember. It was in the 60s. But in 1967, there was an oil tanker called the Torrey Canyon off the coast of the Scilly Isles, off the coast of Britain. And there were many little things that led up to it crashing. So effectively, there was very bad weather. So the captain had gone to bed for the night, but it was bad weather. It was very choppy. It was very foggy. Out of the fog appeared 2 lobster fishing boats. And so whoever was piloting the boat at that time had to maneuver away from them. But they also had a mechanical failure, which meant when they maneuvered away, they couldn't course correct. And as a result, they hit rocks. That resulted in a 36 million gallon oil spill. Okay. That affected the coastlines on Britain, Guernsey, Spain, and France. It was the biggest oil disaster in Europe. Now, that's many little things, because if that fog wasn't there that night, it might have been different, because the fishing boats could have seen that there was a big oil tanker there, etc. If the fog was there, but the oil tankers that would have been different. They wouldn't have had to move course, etc., etc. So many little things will add up to complex failure. And again, yeah, of course, we want to try and avoid them. Of course we do. And the next thing, and the one we probably need to embrace a lot more, is what's called intelligent failure. Now, these are failures that occur in unknown areas, but they involve careful thinking. Okay, and they don't cause harm, or if they do cause harm, the risks are calculated and mitigated. Yeah, so for example, medical trials. Now, there have been medical trials that have caused harm, but sadly, those are absolutely necessary to get the data that you need. So if an intelligent failure happens in an unknown area, and it has to be unknown, it's not intelligent if you're doing it in an area that lots of people have already studied. Because if you're not learning from other people's failures, then that's not intelligent, right? So you're going into an unknown area, you're minimizing risk or trying to mitigate risk as much as you can. It's calculated and it's well planned, yeah? And you generate data that could not have otherwise generated. So it's data you could not have got otherwise. Then that's what we class as an intelligent failure. And those, somebody's just said Swiss cheese model. Complex failures, Swiss cheese model. If you don't know about the Swiss cheese model, effectively, the argument is if you look at a block of Swiss cheese, every hole represents a failure. And in and of itself, that hole is fine. And you might get 2 holes close together, but the rest of the cheese is around it and it's fine. If you get all those holes in the cheese lined up perfectly, then the failure can kind of go right the way through. And that's what causes complex failures. So we know we should learn from failure. There's probably not one person on this call who doesn't think that. But I want to ask this question: what stops us? So put that in the chat box. What stops us from learning from failure? Why don't we learn? Why do we make the same mistakes over and over? And I've seen it in lots of organizations. Fear of what, Melissa? Habits, yeah. Sometimes habits are a thing we sleepwalk through. Embarrassment, fear, pride, lack of reflection, yeah, ignorance, laziness, yeah, could be. Don't take time to review, yeah, making a mistake, getting it wrong, getting things done quickly. Sometimes we're a bit, we're pressured, aren't we? Anxiety, lack of confidence. Yeah, we're not perfect. Yeah, and that's really important to remember. We're not perfect. There's lots of reasons, and I think you've all been pretty spot on. This fear of damaging our self-esteem, effectively. A lot of us are identify as what we are. If we're a project manager, we take pride in that work. As a trainer, I take pride in my work. I'm sure you take pride in yours. So to then go, actually, I got that wrong. That impacts your self-esteem. And there's interesting studies that when your self-esteem is damaged, it can actually impact your cognitive focus, which means you're less likely to want to do those reviews. You're less likely to be able to handle the data. So when your self-esteem is damaged, it's actually quite damaging in other ways, not just for you personally. And, the other thing, it might just be along the lines of, we actually don't know what caused the failure. Maybe it was just a complex failure and we just don't understand it. The data isn't clear. So we don't learn from it because we think we've got it right. And then we do this thing again next time. And guess what? We didn't get it right. Now, for us to learn from failure, we have to have those conversations. And a few people have already touched on this phrase, psychological safety. I'm guessing there's a lot of managers on the call and potentially a lot of HR people, HR managers. And I think you all have a really critical role in shaping the cultures in your organizations. And so, it's really important that you try and lead this way, even if people around you are not leading this way. It's important that you try and set the standards. And the first thing we need people to be able to do is feel free to admit their mistakes. Okay. Then encourage them to learn from that failure. So, okay, you've made that mistake. That's fine. What did we learn? I rarely, when I'm coaching, because I'm a coach as well as a trainer, I rarely say what went wrong or where did you go wrong with that? I'll say, well, what did you learn from that experience? Yeah. We have it in our gift to change the culture by just changing a few words. Making sure everybody speaks up. This is super critical. There's people in your organization that are probably super confident. They'll walk into a manager's office and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Or they'll walk into HR, etc. I remember years ago when I worked in a manufacturing site and I talked to someone about, I said, look, I'm always coming down to the factory. I'm always coming to talk to you guys. I'll go in the cabins and have a cup of tea with you and have a chat and, listen to what's going on. But you never come up to HR. Why don't you come and speak to me up there? And they're like, you're joking. We're not going to HR. Joking. That it's full of fear for them. Because, HR is where people get made redundant. HR is where people get disciplined. HR is where all the bad things happen. So it's really important that we make sure that we are aware of these things. Sometimes just our very job alone will put people off speaking up. So it's really important that we make an effort and saying, look, everybody needs to speak up. And there will be people in your organization that are very comfortable doing that, but there'll be people that are not. Ignore introverts at your peril. There will be people who've got lots to add, but we need to make sure that they feel safe and they are encouraged. And then, once we get that, that will lead to things like better innovation, better decision making, which in turn will lead to that cycle of being able to admit mistakes. So it's really important. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jenny. Try and encourage this in performance management. I'm doing, you have to forgive me, I'm on two screens, I'm toggling back and forth because I can't see everybody. Create transparent no blame culture, love that. Now I when I was doing the sort of research for this, I came across some amazing stuff. It turns out NASA have a prize for the biggest mistake, which I think is brilliant. They have a prize, it's called the Smartest Failure Prize. And what they do is they award it to what they say is the smartest failure. And it could be a failure that has cost them, millions of pounds in research. However, as a result of that, they've got valuable data from it. And the award is given to the team that creates that. And the purpose behind that is to create that organizational culture that does not hide failures, even if it's cost £10 million or whatever. And so in order to do that, they say, right, you've made a mistake, but also what data have we got from that? And they're trying to push that fail fast mentality of, listen, if you fail, you get it out in the open, we can all learn from it and we move on. So I thought that was brilliant. I mean, imagine being at NASA and you go home and you say to your parents, hey, I won an award at NASA. They're, oh, wow, what did you win? I'm the biggest failure. But the way they position it is actually that is something to be proud of. Okay. There's another one, Tata. You've probably all heard of this organization. They also do something called Dare to Try. So, you've given it a go. You've tried your best. It hasn't worked. However, it's produced new data, and it's well planned and strategic. That's the other thing. That's one of the criteria. It has to be well planned. These are not awards given to people who just go running in half-cocked going, oh, let's do this, let's do that. It's let's try this and we'll see if it works. This is what's called intelligent failure. And we can see Tata are now saying that this award over the years has increased 100-fold, which is fantastic evidence that it's catching on, that they're creating an environment where people can take calculated risks. And this is probably my favorite. In Finland, in the 2010s, some Finnish university students at somewhere called Aalto University decided there was a lot of pressure and a lot of fear around failure, and they wanted to, and they recognized that restricted entrepreneurship. So people don't want to start new businesses because it might fail. As I've said, my business failed. It failed due to COVID. Maybe it's complex failure. Maybe there's other things I could have done, but it did fail. But I could have been put off forever. I could have really been terrified of starting again. But I tried to think, what can I do about this failure? And what I love is that the National Day of National Day of Failure in Finland on the 13th of October, people are encouraged to go on social media, etc., and talk about failures. What does that do? What does that do? If I go on LinkedIn and talk about a failure, what does that do? Not for me necessarily, but what does that do for anyone else? Empowers others. Exactly. Reduces stigma. Love that. I've said to people, oh, I shut my business down. And I see their heads go, oh. And it's like, look, it failed, There's nothing I can do about that. I didn't predict a pandemic. Maybe I should have done. Maybe I should have had some contingency for that. But there you go. Yeah. Shows they're not alone. Yeah. Normalizes failure. Absolutely normalizes failure. Just go back to teaching your kids how to ride a bike. They fall off, they scratch their knees, they get back on. We normalize failure. 100%. It's a human experience and it shouldn't be a big dramatic event. I mean, some failures are, some are bigger than others, but they happen. And it's as simple as that. Yeah, it tells me you're authentic. It's interesting. I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn because there is a lot of inauthenticity. There's a lot of people posting on there about their successes and this happened and that happened. Actually, sometimes running a business is rubbish. Sometimes life is slow. You're not getting enough orders. You're not getting enough things going on. But we don't put that on LinkedIn because we don't want people thinking we're not succeeding. I challenge you now to think about authenticity in that respect. So what do we do about these things? Well, let's look at basic failures first of all. What do we do about basic failures? The first thing is we have to befriend failure. It's a strange phrase, but I heard this lovely phrase. I went to an event run by a homeless charity, actually, and they talked about the stigma of being homeless and all the things that happen with, when you are homeless. And they had a phrase, and I've stolen it, and I've said, I'm having that, I'm stealing it. And it's shame dies where stories are told in safe places. Isn't that lovely? Shame dies where stories are told in safe places. So the first thing we need to do is talk about failure, because we're destigmatizing it. We need to, and we can learn from it. If you're telling me, oh, I wouldn't use that contractor because, oh, really, you've had that. Oh, right, that's helpful. Don't stand back and watch me fail in the same way that you failed and go, yeah, I did that. Yeah, 3 months ago, yeah, I failed on that as well. Yeah, that's not helpful. So we need to reduce the stigma, by talking about it. I tell my sons that life is a learning experience. It never stops, including parenting. Babies don't come with a manual. 100%. Amen. So that's your first thing I'm going to ask you to do, is just get comfortable with failure, talking about it. Yeah. Don't be embarrassed about it. It happens to the best of us. The next thing is around vulnerability. And what I mean by that is recognizing we are all human. Neither do teenagers. We are human. Every single one of us will fail, and we'll have some basic failures every other day. Every other day we might, we've done it. First thing I did when I bought my house, I came in, got the keys. They gave me the keys. I was so excited. Walked around the house. Oh, it was amazing. Walked out, went to admire the garden. Front door slammed shut. Who's got the keys? Yeah, they're in the kitchen. Basic failure. It happens. Yeah. So get comfortable. There is no point not acting like nothing's ever going to go wrong, because when it does go wrong, you're in for a massive, massive shock, right? So get comfortable with vulnerability. I found being authentic, sharing your own things can be so bittersweet. If it resonates, it can be connected and powerful. You can also be othered. Yeah, there is that. Some people don't handle that very well, but what I would say is that's a great time to find out who your real allies are. If people turn away from you when you fail, what's that on the social media? If you don't deserve me in my best, if you don't, if you don't deserve me in my if you don't support me in my worst times, you don't deserve me in my best, something like that. I don't know. I'm too old for social media. But the next thing I'm going to mention is catching errors. Okay. So small errors can happen. Okay. Get them before they become complex errors. So I don't know if anyone on the call works in manufacturing or has done, but there is something in manufacturing called andon, which is Japanese, and it means to kind of catch an error straight away. And they have something called an andon cord, and it's like a pull cord that you get on a bus or whatever, but there's an andon cord across the line. So Toyota came up with this concept, and if an operator sees an error, they are obliged to pull that andon cord. Anybody who works for Toyota, whether it's the receptionist, the cleaner, the security man, or whatever, anyone can walk through that factory. If they see an error, they can pull that cord. That will stop the production. Now imagine the power to stop production in a factory. Imagine, I know if I'd have gone to my boss and said, I've stopped production on there, they'd have gone, you've what? Did you know how many thousands of pounds this is costing us, etc.? However, in Toyota, it's actually an obligation. So you are obliged to report errors. So the shame isn't creating an error. The shame is not reporting it. Okay, so it's super, super important. What the thinking is there is we get that error before that defect is passed on. Because when that defect gets passed on, it can get compounded and it can cause lots of other problems. So catch errors early. And then blameless reporting. And I think somebody said earlier this blame shame, let's not blame people when they make errors. That's not to say there isn't blame sometimes, but let me show you something. There is a spectrum of blameworthiness and praiseworthiness. At the end, which is blameworthy, would be something like deviance. Somebody deliberately goes out of the way, sabotages an issue. Somebody accidentally throws somebody's CV in a bin, and then it all kicks off because that person didn't get an interview and they've put a complaint in, and you're like, oh, somebody Janice didn't like that person, so she threw it in the bin. That's deviance. 100% blameworthy, no issue. Okay, so when we're talking about making mistakes and errors, this is not about everybody gets off scot-free. It's all rainbows and unicorns and we all sit around singing Kumbaya. If it's genuinely blameworthy, then fine, let's have that conversation. Then we start moving up. So it could be inattention. So it could be Janice didn't put that in the bin. It literally slipped off her desk and she didn't notice it. She's so busy, her desk is full of stuff. Okay, that's slightly different. Then we get to lack of ability. Janice didn't know what she was doing. She thought she'd submitted them to the next stage and she hadn't. She made a mistake. Then we've got process inadequacy. Well, actually, we probably shouldn't be doing these manual processes because these errors will happen. Then you get the task itself. You know, we've had 4,000 CVs for this job. It's crazy. It's overwhelming. It's too big. Then it's about complexity. It's like, yeah, but we're also dealing with lots of other issues. Then you get into uncertainty. Well, actually, we don't know where this is going. We've advertised the job. We've got no job spec. Therefore, we didn't really understand who was going to apply for it. You get the picture. Then you get to hypothesis testing. What happens if? And then you get this kind of exploratory testing. So it's an experiment. And this is what we talk about when we talk about intelligent failure. So the very end of it, deviance, that's probably blameworthy. But then the middle bit, you're getting into where we're talking about basic failures, where just somebody's made an error. And then you get in the middle bit is kind of complex failure. And I guess the last two, hypothesis testing and exploratory, that's definitely what we would call intelligent failure. Now, only 2 to 5% of errors are considered truly blameworthy. Only 2 to 5%. The rest are somehow explainable. So, for example, inattention, you might say, well, that's down that blameworthy end. What might be an issue with inattention? Why might that need investigation rather than going straight to blame? Why might you consider, what's a cultural difference? Sorry, Jenny. Let me know what you're talking about, Jenny. Tell me about inattention. What might be the cause of that? Oh, is it Japanese? No. That happens in every plant. So it's Japanese in that it was first created in Toyota. If you go to any plant now, any manufacturing plant, and it doesn't have to be cars anymore, it's any manufacturing. So Toyota created something called the TPS, the Toyota Production System. They perfected this kind of moving production system. And a lot of the things that they have put in there, like the andon, that's Japanese. However, that is rolled out now. If you go to any factory worth anything, I mean, good factory that uses this methodology, they will have an andon system. Any factory. And others will have a variation of it. So, for example, healthcare might have something where it's like, oh, this happens, we have to stop this because, yeah. So that it started in Japan, but it's across the board. External factors. If there's inattention, what could be going on? And actually, it could be that this person's been, it's not the government. Inattention could be that this person's just tired. They've worked a long shift. You know, they're working a double shift, etc. Now, so I've said only 2 to 5% are truly blameworthy. However, when Amy Edmondson did her work and she went into corporate America, which is probably a representation of most corporate cultures, what percentage of errors were treated as blameworthy? Whether they were or not doesn't matter. What percentage of errors do you think? So give me a percentage in the chat. What percentage of errors do you think were treated as blameworthy? 80, 85, 60, 70, 50, 90. Yeah, you're all in the same ballpark. You're absolutely all in the same ballpark. It's actually between 70 and 90%. So again, why do we do that? And I think that is because of that lack of psychological safety and that lack of creating that error culture. So one of the things I want you to think about after today is how can we celebrate some of these errors? Now, again, I don't want people to go out and make errors. Nobody does. Absolutely nobody does. But look for intelligent errors, intelligent failures, and go, what can we do about that? How can we have this kind of conversation where errors are part of the fabric of our work life? Because otherwise we go to the blame and shame. And as we've already said, blame and shame will impact whether people are willing to open up. Some people feel better about themselves when others fail. That sadly is the case. But again, we need to create. You're right. If we then destigmatize it, it won't make a difference. Because if I think, I've got a bit of beef with Janice in the office and she's cocked up on this CV. Oh, look at Janice. She's made a mistake. Now I feel good. If then the HR manager goes, well, we all make mistakes. It's not really Janice's fault. She's had a lot of work to do. I'm like, oh, okay. It neutralizes it. If we can destigmatize it, we can neutralize the shame. Therefore, these people that are playing politics with failure, we take away that weapon that they've got. Yeah. Does increasing audit requirements and litigation play a part? It may have played a part, yeah, because some people are sort of saying, well, we can't be honest and open because we might get sued. But, you know, if you look at somewhere like NASA, hugely successful organization, you look at somewhere like Tata, one of the massive organizations, global, you know, they own so much all over the world. They're able to do it. So when people say, well, we can't be honest because we might get sued, well, other organizations are doing it. It's proven it can happen. So it's a convenient excuse. People, you know, covering themselves, etc. The bit where it fails down is the learning process. You're quite right. And the learning process can't happen until we have those conversations. So leading on from that, and that's perfect timing, how do we manage, sorry, yeah, I'm going to give you some examples. We do need to talk about our failures. So let me just give you some examples. Do you think this is blameworthy or not? So a bus crashes into a house. The accelerator pedal got stuck, and upon investigation, it seems that the driver had just put their gym bag on the floor near his feet, and the pedal got caught. Blameworthy or not? Yes or no? Yes. Melissa, you're saying no. Yes, 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 yes. Most people say yes. Inattention. Inattention, or possibly even deviance, because surely that driver knows that you are not supposed to have something near the pedals. Negligent, exactly. So negligent, right. So then we might get into, Jenny, well, where is he supposed to store his bag? Yeah, that could be a discussion. So in that investigation, that's what we would look at. So what I'm saying is, rather than going straight to blame and shame, I think that common sense, come on, Shirley, we all know about common sense. We know it's not common. I would say it's deviance because he's deviated from a safety rule. Any bus driver worth the salt should know that this is an issue. Am I going straight to blame? No, I'm going to listen more. I'm going to give that person a really good listening to and find out what's gone on. Okay, what about the next one? So Susie's gone to work on her first shift as a cashier, and she's working in a wholesaler, so they're dealing with a lot of money. She's got a supervisor who said she shouldn't be left on her own, but the coach said, oh, it's fine. You'll be all right. At the end of the day, her till was down £67, and the credit card receipts do not tally. Blame? What? Shouldn't have been left. All of you are saying no blame. Absolutely. What would you do in this case? Lack of training. Exactly that. So if we go back to that, continuum, it's a lack of training. So shouldn't have been left. Speak to the supervisor or the coach, challenge the supervisor. Absolutely that. So we're not blaming Susie, but there is something to come out of this, but we don't go straight to blame. Pharmaceutical company runs trials for treatment of lung cancer. The results are inconclusive, but they're not showing any benefits. And actually, some patients experience very significant side effects, and the trial was stopped. Okay. Where's that on the scale? Blame, is it praiseworthy or blameworthy? Praiseworthy or blameworthy? Yeah. It is praiseworthy. This is a real case. If you want to Google this, it is a real case. But there is, it was a large pharmaceutical company, and 5 people died. Now, you might be like, oh my God, I thought you said intelligent failure wasn't harmful. 5 people were going to die anyway because they had stage 4 lung cancer. So that's the very sad truth. These 5 people also signed up to it, knowing full well that this could be an outcome. So as awful as this sounds, that was part of the risk factor that was included in the design. The design of the actual trials was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And at each stage, and it went through 3 stages. So at stage 2, they added vitamin B12 to the drug, and that improved the outcomes, but still wasn't quite right. At stage 3, they did something else. And after 3 stages, they pulled it. And it's kind of a big deal in the pharma world because they've been so open and transparent going, didn't work. However, they got lots of data from it. And that's what we're looking for. So How do we deal with complex failures then? As we've said, the first thing we need to do is learn from our failures. So when I mentioned that oil disaster, the Torrey Canyon, that actually led to a change in how oil disasters are now dealt with. There was some really interesting stuff that came out of France, how they dealt with it, and now they use less detergent and things because that can actually be more damaging. And it's really quite interesting. Well, it's interesting if you're a nerd like me, but it's interesting how they changed entirely the emergency response. They also changed the design of ships. So oil tankers now have to be double hulled. They can't be single hulled. And this is thought to have reduced massive amounts of potential risk. Matthew Syed is another one that's written a book called Black Box Thinking, and he talks about the medical profession and comparing that to the aviation industry. So the medical profession, particularly in America and places, is very kind of hush hush, keep it covered up, don't talk about it, because there is big problems over there with litigation, I guess. Whereas the aviation industry is very open and transparent, and every safety innovation that you can think of that you take for granted now when you board a plane, like not smoking, like having seatbelts, etc., having overhead oxygen masks, having, all those innovations have come about because of a failure at one point or other. So we have to be able to learn from these failures. The other thing is look for early warnings, because, as we've said with the Torrey Canyon, if they'd have just acted on that early warning of, it's really foggy, if they'd just eliminated one of those elements, it could have saved that ship. NASA had a space shuttle explode, Space Shuttle Columbia. And that's a really interesting story. Again, it's not nice, it's not pleasant. But when Columbia launched, one of the NASA engineers noted some loose specks on the wing. He looked at the footage and go, what are these specks of, what is it? What is that stuff on the wing? And he went to his seniors and he said, look, in order to get a better view of that, I'm going to go to the Department of Defense and ask them, because they'll have better satellite pictures. I want to be able to see what is that stuff. And they concluded it's probably just some foam. And so the NASA managers said, it's just some foam. It's fine. You don't need to do that. And they shut him down. Turns out that foam on re-entry broke one of the wings, put holes in the wings of Space Shuttle, and it exploded, killing 7 people. If they'd have just acted on that, it would have saved people's lives. I had an incident, a very serious incident, many years ago when I was a training manager, and I was dealing with a learning provider, and he wouldn't provide certificates. I had 200 learners going through a program with his company, and the certificates were always delayed. And I was like, Dave, where's the certificate? Oh yeah, I'll send them next week. Dave, where's certificates? Yeah, we just had a bit of a problem with our printer. Dave, we've not had any certificates. What is going on? Now, I got really frustrated and I phoned up the learning, the awarding body. And I said, look, I've got some real concerns here. He owes me 200 certificates he's not given me. I'm not going to send him any more work until this is figured out. The very long story short, he was later tried for 10 counts of fraud to the tune of £1.4 million. So, listen to your gut. Sometimes your gut is right. Listen to those kind of early warnings. Don't get annoyed at false alarms. So we talked about this Andon system in Japan, and you could have 12 pulls of that a day, and only one will actually be a serious issue. What that does, it gives you data. It tells you, actually, yeah, we need to look at those other 11 and go, why did you think that was an issue? Because it could be that operator needs more training. Yeah, they've got it wrong. Or it could be that there is something going wrong, but it's not what we thought. I always think back to when I used to work for a big corporate, massive corporate, and they would send out test phishing emails once a month. And if you got it and you spotted it, you got a gift voucher or whatever. They were really hot on phishing emails, to the point where I got really paranoid. I would just get an email off anyone, and if there was a link in it, I'm like, nope, not opening it. And I would send it to IT. I'd be like, is this phishing? And we had a special dedicated email department to send it to, and I would say 9 times out of 10 they would come back, no, actually probably even more, like 49 times out of 100, they'd come back and go, no, it's fine. It's fine. And I contacted someone one day. I said, I'm really sorry. I feel like such an idiot. And they're like, no, please, keep doing it. Keep doing it. We would rather you contacted us 50 times than just click on one. So false alarms should not be considered a waste of time. They could actually flag up more important data. And remember, everybody has a voice. Everybody has to say, bring stuff to the table. It's very clear if you listen to or you look at the transcripts from the NASA meeting, for example, it's very clear that the NASA senior management did not want any dissenting voices, and they shut that conversation down. And in doing so, resulted in 7 people dying. So, people have different perspectives. I've worked in organizations before where managers just want to hear what they want to hear. They just want to hear. I worked for a company, and we had a terrible. I don't even put this company on my CV. I don't have on LinkedIn. It was the worst company I've ever worked for. And we had a 107% attrition rate. Now, if a lot of you work in recruitment and HR, you'll know what that means. We recruit people within 6 months they've left, and it was a constant turnover, and it was 107%. We were recruiting more. We just kept losing people. And I went to the CEO at the time. I said, we need to fix this. And he was like, oh, there's nothing wrong. I said, there is wrong. I said, we're a staff of 27. It was only small. We're a staff of 27. We've recruited 35 people this year. That's not healthy. He wouldn't have it. He absolutely insisted everything was fine. If you do not listen to those dissenting voices, you are just storing up problems later on. Encourage people to challenge. Encourage the quiet ones in the corner that never speak up. If they don't want to speak up in a big meeting, fine. Take them to coffee the next day and say, listen, I saw you were quite quiet in that meeting. I'm just, do you have some concerns? Because I really want to hear them. I don't want to get down the position where we've ignored, red flags. What are your thoughts? Yeah. Make sure that everybody is allowed to have a voice and to have their say. Now, the next type of failure we talked about is intelligent failure. And I'm not going to kind of tell you how to not do that, because that's the one we want to kind of do. Again, I don't want people to fail. But if it's in an unknown area, so it's going to give you more data, then that's really useful. And we're never going to innovate, and we're never going to come up with new things if we don't go into those unknown areas. That's where the good stuff lives. People speaking up, nothing happens. Yeah, I agree. And that the thing is, Jenny, that's why we have a massive role in making sure it does happen. This is the problem. We can blame the company culture, and we can sit back and go, well, there's no point speaking up. But if we don't speak up, what happens? I would always rather speak up, even if it means getting ignored, than not speak up. I don't want to be that person that has to ring somebody up and say, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband's been sent to the hospital with a serious injury. We knew this was a problem, but I didn't see the point in speaking up. What's the point? You've got to try. I understand it's frustrating, but that one time when it goes wrong, you don't want that. Has to be in an unknown area, because otherwise it's not intelligent. Yeah, if we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over, that is not intelligent. That needs to be looked at. It has to be calculated, and like I say, that in the depending on what industry you're in, those calculations will be different. It might be that you lose a couple of £100, or it might be the 5 people die. That's not pleasant, but that's the world of pharma. That's the world of real high risk medical and pharmaceuticals. And it has to give you data that could not have been earned another way. Because if it could be earned another way, then do it another way. Don't put risks out there if you can get that in another way. So we want to encourage intelligent failure. We want people to think about that. We know that basic failures happen, and we try and mitigate that, put in processes. Again, if you've ever worked in manufacturing, you may have heard this term poka-yoke. So we can error-proof some things. If you've ever bought a Ford car, you can't put petrol in a diesel Ford, and vice versa, because they've engineered it out. You can't do it. It's been engineered, so you can't do it. So basic errors, we can do stuff about. Complex errors takes a lot more work, but we have to talk about them. And intelligent failure, we don't want people to fail, but we want to make good calculated Exactly. People should be flagging problems. These are some examples of intelligent failure. So Teflon. Yeah, there's in the 1938, a chap called Roy Plunkett was trying to get a new coolant gas. So he's working on coolant gas and it failed because the elements solidified. Now, we could have just gone, look at this, these elements are solidified. What a waste of time. What a load of rubbish. But he said, well I wonder what that gives me, though. And he found out this stuff was actually heat resistant and non-stick. And now we use it in everything, and it's called PTFE. And actually, we use it in cooking. We use it in clothing. If you're wearing waterproof clothing, quite often it's got PTFE or Teflon in it. This has been a massive, massive success, and it came as an error, but it was an intelligent failure because it gave him data that nobody had knew before. Nobody had seen this thing before, and he discovered it. We've got things like X-rays. So again, in 1895, so going way back, somebody called Wilhelm Röntgen was studying a screen because he was studying cathode rays, right? And then this screen started glowing. And it was like, well, that's weird. What's that? Turned out he discovered a new form of radiation. Again, new data. So it was an intelligent risk. He was looking for something specific, but what he got was something completely different. Superglue, exactly the same. So again, in the 1940s, 1942, a guy called Dr. Coover was searching for a clear plastic gun sight. And he was messing about with this plasticky stuff, and he realized this substance was just really super sticky. And later on, he engineered it into one of the world's most powerful adhesives. So when we talk about failure is often, well, it's often just the start of something, you know. Failure is absolutely inevitable. You can't get away from it, and to pretend it doesn't exist is ridiculous. Those companies that are thriving, those companies that are really doing well, they're the ones that accept failure is inevitable. But remember, not all failure is equal. Some is blameworthy, most isn't. Most of it is probably worth investigation, at least, you know, to find out why this failed. No problem, Jenny. And finally, as we've talked about, psychological safety is critical because, as Jenny's pointed out, you don't want people saying, oh, what about this? And then nothing happens. Yeah. If you're going to encourage to speak up, make it safe and make it actionable. Make it so that people are going to do something with it. So if you are interested in this topic, and it is a really fascinating topic, there are 2 books I would strongly recommend you have a look at. Matthew Syed, Black Box Thinking, and Amy Edmondson's Right, Kind, and Wrong. Both really easy reads. Both got tons of examples of how failing and talking about failure. It's not just failing. We don't want people to fail. I don't want people to fail. I want everybody to succeed. But we have to accept it's inevitable. And when it does fail, it's what we do in that moment that will determine our success or failure. If you're not really into reading, there's tons of stuff online, you know, talking about embracing your failure. There's loads of TED Talks on this. There's videos, there's podcasts. There's absolutely tons of stuff out there. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap up. That's my details there. If you do want to talk, I'm happy. I can stay on at the end for a little bit. But if not, contact me. Reach out. You know, tell me about your successes. Tell me about your failures. You know, let's talk. Let's talk. But thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm not a great believer in good luck, so I won't say good luck with this. What I'll say is just go and be awesome and just keep talking. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jane. And thanks to everyone for attending. I hope you got lots out of it. We'll send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event, and I'll put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of the follow-up information or a copy of the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. Our next event is on Tuesday, the 17th of March, and is called Avoiding Grievances and Tribunals, the Lost Art of Conversation, and a link to sign up for that will be included in the email. If anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit, exec recruit and charity recruit within the group. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to you, Jane, for your time and effort in putting the event together, and also to everyone for signing in. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care now.